This month, we're making half rectangle triangles using the familiar 2 at a time method and then trimming them down to 2" by 3" rectangles. The steps are similar to making 2 at a time half square triangles, but the big difference comes when it's time to trim. So this month, our focus is on trimming half rectangle triangles correctly, since the seam does not run at a 45-degree angle. If we don't trim these units carefully, our half rectangle triangles will turn out a little wonky in the block and you might lose your points during piecing. The goal is to remember that these units will be sewn into the block with a 1/4 inch seam, so we want those pointy corners to stay nice and sharp, about a 1/4 inch away from the top, bottom, and sides. And to show you why trimming here is so important, I've gone ahead and drawn you a rectangle that is 2" by 3". Now I want to highlight that when we trim, we're aiming to have the diagonal seam run through points that are 1/4 inch in from the sides and corners. I'm marking the dots at that 1/4 inch spot. If I draw a line connecting the dots, which would represent the seam, you'll notice that it doesn't run at a perfect 45-degree angle, and that's why the tips will look a little blunt. Another thing to note is that we are making half rectangle triangles in 2 different fabric arrangements, which means the diagonal seam will run in opposite directions for half of them. But again, when you mark the points a 1/4 inch in and draw your seam line, it'll show the same thing. The seam is not at a 45-degree angle and the rectangles will have slightly blunt corners, which is not the same as making half square triangles. Here are the pieces I cut out to make our half rectangle triangles. I've already arranged them into pile 1 and pile 2. On the back of the lighter fabric in pile 1, I drew a diagonal line from the bottom left to the top right corner. In pile 2, I drew the lines from the top left to the bottom right corners. And since the lines run in opposite directions, we'll end up with half rectangle triangles with 2 different fabric arrangements. After drawing your lines, pair the rectangles right sides together. Then slightly rotate the top fabric so that the diagonal line matches the corners of the bottom piece. For the second pile, you'll rotate them the other way to match those corners. And once everything is lined up, sew a 1/4 inch seam on both sides of the drawn lines. I'll sew all of these units at the machine and I'll meet you back here. Now that I have the 1/4 inch seams sewn on both sides of the lines, you can see how the seams in the 2 piles are running in different directions. The next step is to cut these units apart by cutting right along the drawn line. I'll go ahead and do that with all the units. And now that the units are separated into half rectangle triangles, it's time to press them open. I'm going to press the seams toward the darker fabric. Gently finger press first and then follow with your iron. I'm going to go ahead and press all the units. Now it's time to trim your half rectangle triangles down to 2" by 3". Remember, if we want to keep our points sharp, the seam needs to hit a 1/4 inch in from the top, bottom, and sides when we're trimming. Watch as I show you my ruler. I'm going to make my markings to make it easier to trim. Notice that the points that I mark are a 1/4 inch in from the 2" marking and the 3" marking. Now watch as I lay my ruler over the unit. I will adjust the ruler so the seam runs right through those 1/4 inch points we talked about. Sometimes it might look like your ruler is a little crooked, but don't worry. If the seam runs through your marks and the fabric covers the 2" and 3" lines of your ruler, you're good. Trim 2 sides, then rotate your unit, and then line up the freshly trimmed sides with the 2" and 3" marks. Your seam should still run right through those 1/4 inch points. Then trim the last 2 edges. Now that this is trimmed correctly, you'll notice the corners are a little blunt, and that's exactly what we want so the points stay perfect once the block is pieced together. Now I'm going to trim a half rectangle triangle from the other pile, and the idea remains the same. We are always going to keep track of where the seam runs and make it run through those points that we marked on the ruler. It might feel a little wonky, and that's the reason why we cut out pieces that are large enough to trim down. So go ahead and line up those corners and give it a trim. Rotate and line up again and trim the other 2 edges, and you will end up with half rectangle triangles, again with blunt ends on all the corners. Hey, so now I'm in the middle of piecing the rest of the block, and I just want to show you something that might get you confused, but you're actually doing it right. and is that when you're sewing the quadrants together, your half rectangle triangle points will not reach all the way to the edge of the units. And that is on purpose, because that 1/4 inch space will disappear into the seam allowance when you sew the block together. So yes, your units will look a little odd right now, but don't worry, your perfect points will show up once everything is stitched into the block. And here is my finished block. I hope you have fun with this one. Notice how it's all sewn together, the points and pieces will connect just like they should, and don't stress about what it looked like before. We want that 1/4 inch seam space. Happy sewing and happy May!